At 4:32 a.m., the sharp wail of a didgeridoo tore me from sleep, followed by the sight of a man in a tie-dye kilt dashing past my cabin window, shouting about ley lines and wolves. I blinked, half convinced I'd tumbled into a lucid dream or a low-budget music festival. But when I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand and boots half-laced, the truth hit harder than a winter gust. My secluded mountain perpetually hard-earned refuge was a riot of chaos. Tents sprouted like mushrooms across my meadow, fairy lights dangled from pines, and a woman twirled a fire poi in the clearing I'd spent last summer restoring. At the heart of it stood Elise, a megaphone clutched in one hand, a crystal pendulum swinging in the other, preaching to a crowd of 100 strangers about reclaiming the earth's pulse. My land, bought with years of savings and sweat, had been transformed into Spirit Haven, a so-called festival of cosmic renewal, according to a banner made from stitched yoga mats. Elise, the self-appointed keeper of the ridge in our loose-knit mountain community, had orchestrated this invasion, claiming my property as communal ground for her followers. I stood there, steam rising from my mug, as the dawn light crept over the hills, and a slow, dangerous smile crossed my face. Elise had no idea she'd crossed someone who'd just struck a deal with Mateo, a rancher known for his herd of ornery goats. I slipped back inside, closed the door, and let the hum of her makeshift utopia fade for now. This wasn't just a gathering, it was a siege. I'd purchased this land 4 years ago, cleared every stump, and built a cabin to escape the world's noise. Now, it was a carnival of Elise's devotees, hippies, drifters, and wannabe shamans who believed her mantra that private property was a myth when the earth called. She'd clashed with me before, sneaking onto my trails for midnight chant sessions, insisting that sacred land knows no boundaries. When I'd put up barbed wire, she'd planted signs calling my cabin a greed fortress. Now, she'd gone full warlord, turning my retreat into her stage. As I trudged through the chaos toward the lower field, the damage sank in. My hiking paths were littered with crystal grids and sage bundles. My fire pit was now a moon tea station. Dream catchers hung from my oaks, alongside flyers for energy realignment workshops. A dreadlocked teen offered me a cup of lunar broth, unaware he was trespassing. Elise had sold them a lie. This was public land, a gift from the universe. When I confronted her at her RV headquarters, she waved a dog-eared permit scribbled in glitter pen, claiming it came from her Council of Starlight Unity, a website she ran with 0 followers. I called it out, and she accused me of stifling the planet's voice with my colonial facts, threatening to cleanse my aura if I resisted. Her followers chanted, "Free the hills, let the spirits soar." A woman blew a ram's horn. Another shook a rattle. I walked away, not broken, but scheming. Mateo's words rang in my ears. When trespassers overstay, let the hooves do the talking. I drove to a signal spot, called him, and laid out my plan: goats, bells, and a dawn reckoning. He chuckled, saying it'd beat last year's rodeo washout. We set it for Saturday morning. That night, I stayed silent, watching Elise on my porch, guzzling elderberry wine and preaching about defying man-made cages. Her followers built a sacred mandala in my berry patch and screened a documentary on dandelion wine. I kept calm, stashing my valuables in a steel shed I'd built after a flood. I rigged motion sensors, bell chimes, and grain feeders on a timer. Every piece was in place. As Elise led a starlit sermon about breaking the chains of ownership, I bunkered down in my shed, ready for the storm. Revenge, I reminded myself, isn't loud, it's sharp, hoofed, and timed like a sniper's shot. By morning, the camp had turned into a surreal theater. Elise, draped in a hemp shawl, stood on a platform of my old fence posts, decrying boundaries as soul wounds. Near my creek, a vibration cleanse station swapped nettle tea for TikTok follows. Someone had carved my firewood into a totem of a hawk fused with a wind chime. A man offered to purify my chakras with a sage-soaked rag, mistaking me for a passerby. I declined, and he called me a lost banker. I stayed low, snapping photos of Elise's rants for the sheriff. When she caught me near her aura sanitation pit, she marched over with her crystal-wielding posse and a guy named Cosmic Dan, demanding I leave her holy ground before I poison the vibe. I showed her my deed. She brandished her megaphone like a wand, claiming the earth laughed at laws. Her crew nodded like she'd unlocked the cosmos. I retreated, letting her think I'd folded. That evening, her starfire circle lit up the valley. Elise, in a cloak of recycled curtains, led hymns about erasing borders as her followers passed around flutes and suspect brownies. I crept through the shadows, placing orange markers for goat paths, bell triggers, and grain zones. Mateo's goats Luna, Blaze, and Thorn were trained to chase food and sound, not attack, but their bleeding chaos and sharp horns would scatter any crowd. At midnight, I met Mateo on the back ridge. His trailer held the goats, snorting and pawing like restless warriors. I showed him my map, chime zones, grain drops, GPS tags. He grinned, calling it a prank for the ages. We pinned the goats behind a thicket, and I tested the bell chimes through an earpiece. All was ready. At 4:45 a.m., I woke in my shed, the air sharp with frost. The camp dozed, drunk on its own fantasy. I triggered the bells from the platform speakers, a jangling pulse slicing the silence. Grain feeders dropped barley, apple slices, and molasses. Luna moved first, her GPS weaving toward the meadow. Blaze followed, aiming for the tea station. Thorn needed a second chime, but soon trotted toward the mandala. The first scream hit at 4:52. A woman with a painted forehead saw Luna chewing a tapestry and shrieked. Her cry roused stargazers, who found Blaze nosing their incense. Panic spread like wildfire. Campers stumbled from tents, tripping over crystals, yelling about cursed spirits. The platform buckled as Luna head-butted it, the spirit haven, banner crashing onto a guy clutching a kale smoothie. Elise emerged, barefoot, megaphone raised, calling the goats Earth's enforcers. But when Blaze bleated from my porch, her devotees bolted, abandoning tents, flutes, and jars of nettle sludge. Elise tried one last stand, waving her pendulum at Luna, who nibbled her shawl and wandered off. Elise's scream raw, unhinged echoed as she fled. 10 minutes later, the camp was a wasteland. I descended, patting Blaze as I passed. Mateo arrived, coaxing the goats back with a laugh, saying they'd earned their keep. I handed him a jar of my homemade jam, and he swore the goats were now local legends. The silence was divine, but Elise wasn't finished. Hours later, she returned, live streaming on her phone, accusing me of goat warfare and vibrational sabotage. I sipped my coffee as she ranted about cosmic betrayal. Deputy Larson rolled up, surveyed the wreckage, and watched my footage. Elise's decrees, her fake permit, her mocking the law. He arrested her for trespassing, vandalism, and impersonating authority. She filmed her own arrest, sobbing about being a martyr of the stars. Days later, she sued, claiming the goats caused spiritual trauma. In court, her scribbled complaint and photos of grazing goats were mocked. My videos, Mateo's affidavit, and county deeds crushed her case. The judge, fed up, dismissed it and warned of harassment charges. Elise tried again, filing a claim about ancient star paths crossing my land, backed by her celestial kinship guild. The judge, unimpressed by her crystal-tipped staff and moon journal rants, shut it down, citing my title and maps. Outside, she glared, muttering about cleansing the courts. A week later, a cairn appeared just beyond my fence, etched with "Feel the Earth's heartbeat." I photographed it and let the rain take it. The story exploded online. A camper's shaky video went viral, spawning memes and shirts. Honor the land or face the flock. Strangers sent letters. Mateo got goat rental offers. I rebuilt my paths, replanted berries, and installed a bleeding speaker at my gate. Hikers posted about my haunted land, and I let the legend grow. One camper, Nora, apologized with homemade cookies, admitting Elise's vision crumbled under reality's horns. The cabin became my fortress, defined by grit and 3 rowdy goats. Months later, Mateo visited with Luna. He gifted me a carved goat figurine, dated with the stampede and inscribed, "Guard what's yours." We watched Luna but a snow-dusted stump, and I knew this land was mine not just by law, but by blood and bone. Elise faded, peddling starwater at the market to shrugs. The mountain stayed still, its truth louder than her chants. In that quiet, I found home.